We have two amazing keynotes here with us this afternoon to close us out for this week. The first one is presented by Cox Conserves, and it's Ryan Johnson, the founder and CEO of Culdesac. Before joining Culdesac, Ryan Johnson was on the founding team of Open Door, a real estate technology company that gives sellers a competitive cash offer on their home. Open Door is now in 42 markets with over 100,000 customers served to date. Outside of Culdesac and Open Door, Mr. Johnson has been involved in the real estate space for 2 decades through his own investments. Joining Ryan on stage is Startup Tucson's own Megan Fink. In Megan's role as the program and education manager, she works to support Startup Tucson members through educational programs and pairings with Startup Tucson mentors, partners, and other ecosystem resources to help them launch, grow, and build their businesses. Of particular relevance, Megan happily lived car-free in DC for 13 years, and she's real excited to talk to Ryan today, and let's welcome them to the stage.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hello,
Hi,
hello.
everybody. Thanks so much for being here. It is my pleasure to facilitate our conversation today with Ryan Johnson. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, to kick things off, of course, we'd love to know more. We heard your bio, but we'd love to know more about you and what led to the idea to create a car-free community called Culdesac Tempe.
Yeah, so I went to U of A, and I heard that the Flynn Foundation sponsored this, so I turned down MIT to take the Flynn scholarship to U of A. And 2 things happened from that. One was that it sent us abroad. And I had grown up in Phoenix, had an SUV, and I saw while going abroad, I saw places like Budapest and Amsterdam and Tokyo, and said, wow, there's a lot better ways to make cities than the sprawl of Phoenix. And that started the passion for cities. And after college, I spent a decade working in transportation with trains and helicopters and buses. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit used to the echo here. But and then the other thing that happened from the scholarship is that was looking to do something entrepreneurial. And I met a friend, and we pooled our scholarship money together and used that to get into real estate. And it was a lot easier then. I don't know what homes are going for. Well, actually, I do. Homes are going for a lot around U of A now, but the first place we got was 4 bedrooms for $111K. So you actually could get that using scholarship funds at the time. And we put in a lot of sweat equity, learned how to buy, sell, renovate, and property manage, and built a portfolio of 60 bedrooms by the time we graduated, and saw so much opportunity in real estate. And later on, that friend was starting Open Door, where I joined as part of the founding team. And Open Door has its own story. I'll focus on Culdesac today. What we saw at Open Door was that people want to live in walkable neighborhoods. The majority of the US wants to live in a walkable neighborhood, but less than 10% do because we stopped building them with the advent of the car. And we can build them again because of the innovations in transportation technology. So in parallel over this decade or so that I was at Open Door and before, there was new innovations like rideshare, electric bikes, etc. And I saw that there was an opportunity to make a new kind of neighborhood using modern mobility. And that's what we're doing with Culdesac. So that gets us to Culdesac, and we can tell the Culdesac story in a minute.
Awesome. Well, so from a personal note, as a college student, I studied abroad in Barcelona and got the city bug coming from a small town in central Pennsylvania. And out of that, I chose to move to Washington, D.C., where I moved to a walkable place where I lived without a car. So why was the pivot for you to then build a place like that rather than moving to one that exists?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been car-free for 13 years myself as well. It's a coincidence. In places like New York and Boston and San Francisco, but it also worked in Phoenix. And there's a real opportunity, though, where people will actually pay a premium to live in a walkable neighborhood, and we're just not building enough, and I saw a way that we could. The National Association of Realtors did a study recently, and they found that every generation will pay that premium to live in a walkable neighborhood, and 92% of Gen Z. And so this was like a real business opportunity.
So on that note, let's talk a little about Culdesac Tempe. Let me get this switched. So if you want to walk us through, we have some pictures to show.
Yeah.
If we can switch the slide over.
Yeah, a handful of slides to share it. So Culdesac is a business. We build and manage walkable neighborhoods, and our goal is to build the first car-free city in the US eventually. Our first project is called Culdesac Tempe, It's a 1,000 resident neighborhood. It's in Tempe. It's only a couple miles from ASU. We did look at coming to Tucson and also South Tucson, but we ended up in Tempe. We found an amazing piece of land, and we found forward-looking politicians that were excited about growth and welcomed growth. And so it's on 17 acres, right on the light rail. And today there's 35 buildings and a thriving community. I live there myself. And because the residents, and the key feature is that the residents don't have a private vehicle, and instead they use a portfolio of options. As a result, we got to build something that is wonderful instead of a sea of asphalt. And this, it looks more like, we call it Mykonos-inspired desert modern, where it has, you can go to the next one, it has buildings with interesting corridors, it has great retail, and 55% landscape space. These are all local retailers, including a yoga studio run by one of the residents, a barber, an esthetician, a vintage clothing shop, rather than parking stalls. We have a restaurant that's one of the best in Arizona. AZ Central picked it as one of the top 5. It's by this group that their prior restaurant is on the New York Times top 50 in the country. And we were able to attract retailers because they want to be part of Culdesac, and it's a destination for people to come see it, and our values are values that their customers have. And we have lots of local art, and if anybody's, I don't know if anybody's going back to Phoenix tonight, but we do a local market every Thursday. It's called Little Choya, and we get a lot of local vendors and small businesses, and we're expecting about 500 people tonight, including the grand opening for our grocery store. So it's at night, and there's just lots of shopping. And it's a chance for the Culdesac community to get together, and it's a chance for the neighboring community to come see Culdesac.
And reading so my husband and I actually visited Culdesac. We kind of parked, wandered around, met some people who were about to move in. They were very excited, immediately thought we might be moving there, and were initially wanting community. So there's a whole focus on community. One of the things we also saw was that there's an intentional design in creating some shade. And you talked about the reduced use of asphalt. Do you want to talk a little about some of the design elements, thinking of where we are in southern Arizona and the heat and things like e-bikes?
Yeah, so Culdesac feels 15 degrees cooler than the apartment complex next door, and there's 3 key reasons why. One is there's not a drop of asphalt, and you can go around with the infrared temperature gun and measure it directly, right? When it's a hot day in the summer, it's not just 110. On the asphalt, it's like 150. And not to mention when you get in your car after you go to the grocery store and it's been having the greenhouse gas effect, that can be like 200. So when people say Arizona is so hot, they're not actually thinking about 110, they're thinking about 200. But at Culdesac, it feels much cooler. So the first effect is no asphalt. The second is we have narrow corridors between the buildings. They're 2 to 3 stories. They're only spaced like 8 feet apart, and that creates lots of shade. And then the third is that there's, we said not a drop of asphalt, and the buildings are white and they reflect heat.
And you have how many residents living on property currently?
We've got 60 today.
And when is your next phase of move-ins coming?
So we're leasing now. We have buildings opening up. We're expecting certificate of occupancy from Tempe this week for the next batch, and then another batch in February. And so we'll have a couple hundred residents by mid-next year.
Amazing. So thinking about the location, we talked a little about some of the heat, but why Tempe? What was it like pitching the idea of a car-free community in a car-loving, very fast-growing part of the country?
Yeah, so Open Door started in San Francisco, although it launched in Phoenix, and Culdesac, we were based in San Francisco. But we knew that we wanted to go to a place where this could get done. When we started, people said, you have lost your minds. You're not going to get permission to build. You're not going to have the demand. Thinking about where we could get permission to build, we knew it wasn't San Francisco or New York, and instead we needed a place that welcomed growth. And it doesn't mean it's easy. It's not like cities are saying, great, like come do whatever you want. It was important to bring a great plan and consult the right stakeholders in the neighborhood and in the city, talk to the fire department, et cetera, because what we're doing is different, and it's important that it worked well. And we built up the confidence that it would, and that's why it passed unanimously. The vote passed unanimously. They actually had to pass new legislation to allow us to build without residential parking. And it's less controversial now. Today we're seeing a lot of big changes. I think that the value of walkable spaces has really taken off. Austin just voted to get rid of parking minimums. Minneapolis has done it. Other cities have really pushed the envelope here, and that's wonderful. But at the time that this happened, it was a much more novel idea.
So were there any challenges that you faced that you didn't expect, or easy wins that you thought were going to be harder in getting that buy-in locally?
Yeah, I think that normally if you ask some of the challenges for things like this are like or sanitation and fire, and what we found was that they were understanding of what we were trying to do once we educated them. And even though what we were doing was innovative, like we use an innovative ladder system for fire, for example, they were on board. So perhaps that was easier. And what was harder was the supply chain. So no surprise, COVID made construction much harder. But the supply chain was even more difficult than that, where even simple things like concrete, not just for us, but for every construction project, became much more difficult.
So thinking a little bit about selling the idea of a car-free community, there's angles you can work, right? There's the sustainability element of we're reducing carbon emissions because there are fewer cars on the road. There's the simple fact that walking is the greatest exercise, and so that's a great way for people to get that into their day. In reading about Culdesac and having been there, something that really stood out to me is a core focus on community. And part of why we bring 10 West to Southern Arizona is to bring people together to connect and build community. So I'd love to hear more about how the focus came into one of the things that I read was that we are spending so much time in our car that we're now disconnected from each other. So what is some of that community piece that's really built into Culdesac?
Yeah, so today in the US, we build two different kinds of housing. We build single-family homes and mid-rises. And with single-family homes, we have a painful commute, and we don't know our neighbors. It's lonely. In mid-rises and with double-loaded corridors, it's somehow both lonely and claustrophobic. And you only are really leaving your unit to go to the car, and you don't really want to run into one of your neighbors. There's no organic interactions. And these things contribute to society being more isolated, people being more unhappy. Instead, at Culdesac, it's a place where there's more spontaneous interactions. The doors and windows face the courtyard, and everyone has this thing in common which they can bond over and start a conversation. We also focus a lot on events. The three key things that we differentiate on are mobility, community, and open space.
And some of that community focus, one of the things that I thought also was very interesting is that you're offering a guest suite option. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that works and what that looks like?
Yeah, so we have something, we think of it as extend your home on demand, where so many folks in the US, they'll have like a 3-bedroom house, but they only use 1 bedroom, and it's like when their kids come home for the holidays or something, they use the second one. And instead, it can be something where you have a guest suite that you can book, and we have that all built in. On top of that, we also have short-term rentals like Airbnbs, and we did that so that people can try out the community, because we know that it's a different lifestyle, and so we wanted them to be able to see it.
Awesome. So given that we are here at 10 West on Entrepreneurship Day, and given that at Startup Tucson, what we do a lot is work with people starting, growing, launching, building businesses, I'd love to know a little bit more about the entrepreneurial part of your story. One of the things we talk a lot to our Startup Tucson members is the importance of understanding your customer. So can you tell us a little more about some of the research you did in understanding who are the people who might want to choose this lifestyle, and what are some of the segments and personas of folks that you are targeting as potential members of your community?
Yeah, this one would be perhaps more interesting to do the open door example, because the Culdesac example is the majority of the US wants to live in walkable neighborhoods. And the problem is not actually finding those customers. The problem is the supply. The problem is that they don't exist, right? We have entire cities like New York that the problem is that they're so expensive because people are bidding. And when remote work happened, there's companies in Seattle that said, oh, you can live remote, and they thought their employees would go to Idaho or something for lower cost, and instead, the #1 place they moved was New York City. They actually wanted to spend more on housing to live in a walkable neighborhood, and New York became hotter than ever. So we need to build more, and that's the challenge for Culdesac.
Is there anything else from the entrepreneurial part of your story? So some of the things we talk about is the customer, understanding who your partners are going to be. So who are some of the key partners that you've brought into this process to make the whole community system work beyond? I mean, you've got a light rail there, you've got e-bike partnerships, you've got Lyft. So tell me a little bit about some of
so our residents use a portfolio of transportation options, and we're partnering with all of the best companies in the space. If you haven't tried Waymo in Phoenix, you have to try it. It will blow your mind. We have working cars, driverless cars today, and they actually respect painted bike lanes. And so if you're on a bike, then you'll really understand how good that is, and you're going to see why it's going to be the biggest change to real estate in decades. Our residents also get 15% off Lyft. Through this partnership, we met John Zimmer, the founder of Lyft, and he asked to be on our board. This is one of those like big life moments, like poker face, like, oh, okay, I'll talk to everybody. And so John Zimmer's on our board, which is this amazing thing, and he's an amazing mentor. Our residents also get discounts on electric scooters. We have we have car share on site, so they can rent cars for weekend trips and things like that. And then all of our residents get a free electric bike. So the best startup in Arizona is called Electric. They're actually a rival of this company. But so this is called Super 73, also a great bike. I own one. I can talk about e-bikes all day. If you haven't, actually, how many people have ridden an e-bike? Oh, yes, good. Okay, that's another technology that's really going to change things, and it hockey sticks during COVID. Can I talk about Electric for a minute?
Yeah.
Because like I said, I think it's the best startup in Arizona, and it's not the place that a lot of people are looking. And with Tucson and Phoenix, there's like the U of A and ASU rivalry. Guess where the best startup was started? Grand Canyon University. And I have nothing to do with GCU, that's just how it happened. And it was started by somebody who moved from Minnesota because they didn't like the weather. And he was like a snowboarder, and then he got into skateboards. And he's like, I'm going to order my own, like with Boosted going out of business. He learned how to build skateboards on Alibaba, and he tried to do an electric bike. And the first one that they did looked like a normal bike and just completely flopped. And what he did was the classic, if they were a Y Combinator company, we were, but they weren't. If they were a Y Combinator company, they would be like a classic case study because they listened to the customers and they talked everywhere. And they found out that the customers were counterintuitive. Before electric bikes took off, the people thought that the industry was like hobbies, like road biking and mountain biking. And what those folks wanted was something that didn't look like an electric bike. It's not cool to have an electric bike. And instead, the demand was people that don't care at all about that. And the first biggest customers were like 60 plus, people that had stopped biking. And all of a sudden, they could get back on their bike. And it was RV owners. And the bike they made, if you know the Herman Miller chair story, where at first it looked ugly and then it became beautiful, that's what the Electric XP became, where people thought this bike was hideous. And now it's like the shape of bikes, and it's the iconic bike shape. But so once it took off with sort of the people who stopped biking, then it became more of like active adults. During COVID, it really took off, and now it's everybody. And if you go to your local high school or middle school, you'll probably see a bunch of them today. They're going to sell now I just sound like I'm telling their story, but they're going to sell their 400,000th bike. They're doing, like hundreds of millions of revenue. And it's a very profitable business in an industry where most of the companies are going out of business. Right? Because they were focusing on the wrong things. And the two things that Electric was good at were listening to the customer and the supply chain and low costs, which the environment has really shifted over the past few years, where costs are very important.
Have you run into any supply chain issues in building Culdesac?
Of course, yeah. So it was hard to get concrete.
Yeah.
And just electrical panel. Like if I could go back in time, people ask this question, there's not like some profound thing. I'd be like, I would have ordered the electrical panels earlier. So, and every project, every construction project got delayed because of them. And it's not actually that hard. We looked into what does it take to get a certification, but we were doing scrappy things. We were like flying to the factory and finding out where the workers get breakfast burritos and like making friends to hear the dynamics and figure out how long it was going to be.
Sounds like some iterating. Some prototyping, some customer adaptation, also from the story from the e-bike.
Yeah.
So thanks, Chad, for letting us borrow your e-bike. If anyone hasn't seen one, we have on Lend to have the example of if you were a resident of Culdesac. Would not be this one, but a nice perk that comes along with. I'm assuming part of the focus on e-bike is the heat. And what are some of the other benefits of the e-bike versus the traditional bike?
So having a motor and it has a throttle, you can go multiple times farther without effort. So if you can go, and think about what this means for how far you can go on places, right? If you can bike 1 mile comfortably, and then you can go 5 miles with an e-bike, that actually is 25 times the amount of things in your radius. So it really opens up, and if you think about the density and how spread out a place like Phoenix, Tempe, or Tucson is, that's the difference between not getting anywhere and getting to all kinds of destinations. And it's possible to commute, and many people are doing it.
Have you seen the residents, the 60 residents who are there now? How many of them would you say are working remote from home versus commuting somewhere within the Phoenix area to work?
There's a mix of that. And on this one, it's important to say that Culdesac is for everyone. we're leasing now, and it's first come, first serve. If you're qualified, you can live in Culdesac, and there's all kinds of demographics there, and people are happy and loving it. Actually, one thing I wanted to say before I forget is that we're in a big leasing push right now, and if anybody mention 10 West to our leasing team, and you get $200 off a month if you sign a lease, and everybody that signs a lease gets a free electric XP.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Can we get that on our hashtags
Yeah.
or something?
That's by the end of Sunday.
Okay, awesome. By the end of Sunday, and that's $200 off a month for the whole lease? Okay, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Thank you for that tidbit.
Always be selling.
Entrepreneur, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we will be opening up in a couple of minutes here for Q&A, so start thinking about some questions that you would like to ask Ryan. Before we do that, I have 2 more questions. So to bring us back to the big picture, you've created a car-free neighborhood. What would it look like to scale that to a car-free city? And what do you see as the path forward to scaling that to other neighborhoods and other cities throughout the country? And I'm going to quote you in your article introducing Culdesac. Shout out to cities like Denver, Dallas, and Raleigh-Durham. We're looking at you next. What do they need to do to be ready for Culdesac, and what do we here in Tucson need to do to be ready?
There's demand all over the country, and we have some exciting things we're not ready to announce yet. We were very excited. I think you're going to really like it, and one of them might be in Arizona. And the thing for us is that we've learned some things here, but we also know that this works. And now that this has been a proven concept, now that we've got data on where everybody wants to go, we're even more confident. The tailwinds around mobility are even stronger. There's been all this growth in electric bikes, et cetera. To talk about what the difference is, some of what we have is a regional adaptation. The things that you do for the heat in Arizona aren't going to matter as much in a place like Atlanta. But the other thing is when we build much larger, you asked about the city, in some senses it gets harder. It gets much more capital intensive, and you have to start doing more complex infrastructure. You have to start thinking about things like hospitals, schools, et cetera. But in some senses it gets easier because today when you're plopping a cul-de-sac in the middle of Tempe, there's lots of light rail and things like that, but it's largely car dependency. And so you're trying to fit in a round hole square peg. When your neighbors are also cul-de-sacs, all of a sudden it really works. And there's a lot more within a smaller radius. And if you look at today, what happened in Tempe, there's now construction all around it because everybody wants to be next to walkable neighborhoods, and it's helped it's helped them with building more. And if you think about what that means, if instead Culdesac is building a much bigger piece, it can be the best city in the USA.
I love this. I can't say enough about how much I love walking to work. I have the best setup. I live 4 blocks from work, and that it's a quality of life factor that really, I know it's not for everyone, but I really enjoy it. So I appreciate that you're bringing that to not just Tempe, but beyond. So to bring us back to Entrepreneurship Day here at 10 West, we were chatting a little bit about idea funding. So we've had companies pitching all day long in industry-specific rooms. We started with 130 companies in August through various pitch presentations, and we call them down selects. We have 25 companies pitching today. 20 have already gone, but at 6 o'clock, 5 teams will be pitching on this stage for $25,000.
Exciting. Good luck, everybody.
Well, so this is my question for you. So in raising the $200 million to launch Culdesac, I'm sure once or twice you had to do a pitch. So any advice for the folks who are pitching on the stage in a couple of hours?
Be confident, act like you've been there before. So I think that if a lot of times when people are asking about fundraising, they start to think about how do I get this money? Instead, think about what's a great business and how do I communicate that well? And that's going to go a long way. And make sure that you're pitching a long-term vision as well as what is going to be the first thing to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's the end of my questions.
All right.
Now we want to open to the room. I can't really see you, but I think Peter, there, you've got a hand.
I can't see any hands. So.
Run mics around so that we can all hear your questions.
I'll do it next. Yeah.
Hi.
I'll be next.
I don't even know who I'm looking at, but
It's me over here.
All
I'm
right.
wondering, do you guys have a grocery store in Culdesac?
We do, and their grand opening is tonight. It's called Street Corner.
Cool.
Yeah.
Easy one.
Some softballs. I love it.
saw a couple other hands. Alicia back.
Hey Ryan, thank you very much for your talk. I really appreciate you being here. First, I want to preface this by saying that it's great that Culdesac is meeting a belonging and community need, and that it's giving a certain class of people a choice to be non-drivers and a place to go. There's, of course, another class of folks who are non-drivers by choice. I am one of these. I have a degenerative vision impairment, and I chose to give up driving a number of years ago. As you might imagine, being a non-driver in Arizona is brutally inconvenient and very expensive. I'm joined in this segment by other folks who are physically unable to drive and who can't afford to maintain a vehicle. I understand that people who have this survival need are not your customer, but I'm curious what you think the impact of creating bubbles of non-drivers by choice are having on this greater societal issue in this part of the world.
Yeah, great question, and thanks for sharing your story. We get the question of accessibility at Culdesac a lot, and it's kind of interesting because there's like this assumption that because it doesn't have cars that that's bad for accessibility, and it's actually quite the opposite. Not only is it not a concern, I think Culdesac is a role model for accessibility. So every ground floor unit is accessible, and you can get to the light rail completely step-free. And where else do you see that? And where else do you see an environment with 55% landscape space and a car-free paseo, where it's much safer to be a pedestrian, on wheelchair, etc. So I think that more places like Culdesac is going to be fantastic for accessibility.
Hi. First of all, congratulations. It's an amazing project. I'm curious about, or can you expand more about how was the process for you to convince your equity partner, the debt partner, and even the city to make this disruptive new type of city that is unconventional, and normally these entities always try to share their money with things that are already institutional and that have worked before.
Yeah, so it's something in terms of how do we persuade the different parties, the equity investors, and the city, and I think that thinking about all those things at the beginning and coming up with a plan that worked, right? And for example, one of the reasons that we chose Tempe was because of the job growth, and that's one of the most important things when you're building a project where you're going to add new housing to the area. And we brought lots of data, and it helped seeing what we saw at Open Door, where the data was so clear, and also just hearing from customers that this is how they want to live. And that was part of building the rationale for the project. And then also there's different phases of building the plan and the drawings and showing people those, and showing initial demand signals. And that's how we put it all together. It doesn't mean that it was easy. When you're doing a new concept, the bar is actually higher. And there's some moments that I'll tell one interesting one. So the stodgiest of all, so real estate is quite stodgy in general. The stodgiest of all is the debt. And when the person who ended up doing our debt was visiting in the middle of a dirt lot, I'm like, should I suggest going on an e-bike ride? And this might totally backfire. And instead, he loved it. And he lives in the Bay, and now he says that e-bikes are the difference between, because he mountain bikes, are the difference between getting to the coast or not. And he said it really opened up his eyes. And so that was a risk. Also showing that would maybe sound goofy to some other debt guys, but debt people, but that worked for us.
Other questions? I can't, up there.
Hi. Sort of dovetailing off of the earlier question about accessibility from a disability lens, I'm also wondering, because you're a startup, you have a customer in mind, of course, that you're serving initially, but could you outline your plan thinking about who lives in urban centers for providing this sort of walkable city model for low-income housing and people who are probably ignored often in these kinds of conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very important question. And there's great news, which is that we can build great walkable housing at a much lower cost than what we build today. A lot of the challenges are like roadblocks that cities and we put in our own way. When we're able to build an entire new city that's walkable, the cost structure is going to be far lower. So the market sets the prices. If you look at the West Village in Manhattan, one of the quote unquote nicest neighborhoods in the U.S., it's like $2 million for a decent apartment, and we can build that apartment for a fraction of that, like well under $500,000, if we just build more neighborhoods like that. And it's not rocket science. It's like we can build them just like that. We can even make them better using modern transportation technologies, modern technologies. In New York, they just throw trash in the streets, but yet it's still so nice because we just stopped building other things. The biggest issue is the issue of supply. That millions of people, the majority of the U.S., want to live in a walkable neighborhood, and the only way to fix that is to build a lot more, and that's what we're trying to do at Culdesac. And it's not just us. We also want to be a role model. So Cul-de-sac Tempe is now seen as the reference project for how to build walkable neighborhoods successfully in the U.S. in the 2020s. And that's opening up the door for lots of others, because in real estate, people, like you said, people always ask, where has this been done before? Like, why is this going to work? And so we've lowered the risk for everyone else, and that's going to be part of this.
I have one more question, if we have time.
Yeah.
So in thinking about, I'm carless by choice, but part of that choice is choosing not to own property. So putting your real estate hat on, do you see any financial incentive for people to start developing property like this that you can own?
Yeah, so Culdesac Tempe is for rent. Like I said, we're leasing. Please look us up. But we're actually going to have for sale in other things. Part of the reason we didn't at the beginning is it takes a bit longer to have for sale product, but that's an important component of what we want to do. And we think that offering for sale product is compelling. If I didn't answer your question, let me know. And I'm happy to answer some questions after this.
Yeah, we've got time for a few more questions. I guess.
A prototype overseas is the Battersea Power Station conversion in London, which took an old power station and the coal yards around it and built multiple high-rises and a huge shopping center as a part of the old power station. And that is all walkable, has easy access to downtown as well as the local neighborhood. But what has happened there is with the high-rises of, say, 16 stories typically, you've got much more concentration of population, so you've got much better opportunities for retail and restaurants and office nearby. What's your view of going higher in the U.S.?
More density works well for retail. You're mentioning some examples that are 16 plus. So if you go to Jane Jacobs, at Culdesac, we name our conference rooms after the urbanists that have influenced us the most. So the best conference room is Jane Jacobs, and there's also Donald Shoup, who helped bring awareness to how much free parking can hurt our cities. There's also Jaime Lerner, who showed the benefit of parks, car-free days, and bus rapid transit. But if you ask Jane Jacobs, she would say that you want to have a human scale, and that hits something like 6 to 8 stories. But that doesn't mean you can't be higher, but you don't actually need to go that high to get a lot of density. So Culdesac is only 3 stories tall. We get 45 units an acre, and that's far more density than you get with single-family homes. But you can get something, you can get substantially higher density without going to 16 floors. If you're doing 16 floors like Hong Kong, but that's not what we need to do. It can be, we can build lower height designs successfully, and that can make the cost lower, because as you go higher, the cost per unit goes up.
I saw a couple other hands.
Yeah,
so we got over here.
Let me make sure that. I have a question about the role of government. I think you've touched on it a little bit, but if you could expand on how government can assist in the approval process or in improvements in transportation networks on creating places like Culdesac.
Yeah, the governments can do a huge part of this. I've worked in this myself. I worked for the New York City subway, worked for the World Bank in the past, and that's one of the biggest things that defines the city. From an industry perspective, real estate and transportation are the top 2 industries that define a city. But in terms of what the city looks like, this is largely in the domain of policy. And so one of the challenges is that there's lots of inertia to just continue building like we've built, which leads to sprawl and more sprawl. I think that there's another way to do it, which is to continue to build more walkable neighborhoods. And in the U.S., a lot of the housing that's walkable, which is what people want to live, is illegal to build. And cities can really fix this. I think there's a big opportunity to do it all over.
We have time. I think I'm time for one more question.
Hi.
Okay, I've got the mic here.
Thanks for the info. I have 2 quick questions. So I saw on your website that it's like schedule a tour. So I have a car actually, and like I do need a car. So how would I like get there and park, or like what's the parking situation for people with cars to get close to it? And then do you have plans for like a chain grocery store to go there for like affordability as well? Because, you know, fries is probably going to be like cheaper than the street corner or whatever you said. Thank you.
Yeah, the fries is much larger. So our grocery store is like 4,000 square feet. You know, that's like a tenth of the size of, or even less than a lot of grocery stores. It's sort of between a grocery store and a convenience store. And the residents love it, and oftentimes I think people are surprised that the prices aren't that different. And then your other question, what was your other question, sorry? Oh yeah, parking. So if you want to have a car, there's plenty of great neighborhoods that have parking. In our neighborhood, you can't park on site, and also we worked with the city. You can't park within a quarter mile of the neighborhood, right? You could have one off site, although I think that most people that want to have a car are going to find something else that they like. So, and some of this comes down to the math of what it's like to be car free, right? So if you know the Phoenix area, if you work in downtown Tempe, it's pretty easy. You can take the light rail e-bike. If you work in North Scottsdale, you know, it's probably not. You need to be there 5 days a week. Like the math is pretty expensive to not have a car.
Have you found that most of your residents have given up a car?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so it's possible. Look at that. All right, we are out of time for questions. Thank you so much. We
Thank you for
appreciate
having
you
me.
being here.
Yeah,
Thanks
appreciate you
everyone
having
for
me.
your questions.
And whoever had the bike, thanks for bringing the bike.